Hi, I'm Monica Braxton, aka the Needle Arts Goddess. Today we're going to be going over Even Count Peyote Stitch. This is actually a video for our class on March 26th on our Chatsy site. If you are seeing this and you're not on our Facebook group, you can actually contact me at nags3153@gmail.com to get an invite to our class. All right, what we're going to do first, I'm going to show you some of the tools that we're going to need. All right, for any peyote stitch project that you're going to do, you're definitely going to need some needles, anywhere from size 10 to size 12. 12 is a little flimsier, 10 is a little firmer. You're going to need a good pair of sharp scissors. You're obviously going to need your beads, and you're going to need some beading thread. Fireline is what I use. I use the crystal, and I use a 6-pound. 6-pound is a good thickness to go through the beads, sometimes, many times if you need to. If you don't have access to Fireline, you can use Nymo. Nymo is a nylon thread, and one of the things about Nymo is it's very stretchy. I don't know if you can see that. It's very stretchy. So what you want to do if you're going to use the Nymo is give it a couple stretches before you start using, just to take out some of that tension. Also, you're going to need, not necessarily, but I like using a scoop to get my beads off of my bead mat after I've finished my project, to put them back in their containers. I have triangles. I have a little spoon shaped item. They come with all kinds of different ways. You can use even a spoon, a regular spoon from the house, a plastic spoon, whatever you can find, just to scoop them up. You can get a beading mat. They're not necessary, but I like using a beading mat. The beads stay flat, and if it moves around, you can see the beads aren't really going anywhere. Also, one of the things that I like is one of my go-to tools is a magnetic board. This one is, if you can see, it's from Loran. It's actually a cross-stitch magnet board. I use it for beading. Here's our bead pattern. It's very simple. Bead pattern that we're choosing today. When you're doing your beading, you want my patterns always start from the top to the bottom. A lot of people have learned to go from the bottom to the top. I like the top to the bottom. And if you're using a Bead Tool 4, you get a pattern rather that's from a Bead Tool 4 program. They always start from the top to the bottom. They also come in the picture. You can have the letters or not have the letters on the pictures. They also come in a word format where you can actually look at the words or the numbers of the beads and how many you need in a row. So when you're starting to read a pattern, the first time you put the beads on, you're going to put on the first 2 rows. And this is row 1 and this is row 2. What you do is you start on this, wherever the side is, that's going to be the down bead. This is called an up bead. This is called a down bead because they're in the same one, and this is below this one. You start with the first down bead and you load this one, then you load these, then you load these, and so on, ending up over here with your last bead that you put on. Now, for the sake of time, I have already loaded these. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention is you want a bead stopper. You can buy these little nifty gadgets that are little springs, or if you don't have that or you don't have access to it or don't want to spend the money, a simple old regular bead will work. And the way this bead works for a bead stopper, you just put it on your needle and take it to about 4 inches or so to the bottom of the thread and just go through the bead once or twice. And you're only going to need this through row 3 or 4 of your beads, of your project rather. Then you're just going to pull it off. So going through this, when you're done, just pull it off and you have your tail for weaving in later to secure your piece. Okay, so in the interest of time, I've already loaded on the first 2 rows of beads. Now sometimes it's kind of difficult to read these patterns and some people just don't understand them. This looks like a big old mess to them. So the magnet, what I do is I line up I'm going to go switch down to the next row. And what I'm looking at is your row is always going to start with Even Count Peyote. It's always going to start with a bead on the outside, and then you're going to have a bead on the inside as the end of your row. So I'm looking at this pattern. I know that I start here. This is the 3rd row. What I do is I line up the bottom of this bead And I know that this is where I'm going to end, so I line the magnet up right under there so I can read that this row, that the bottom beads are touching the magnet. These are the ones that I'm going to use for this particular row. Okay, so what some people like to do is lay their beads out, because they don't, this is confusing on the pattern, to like to lay their beads out for what they're going to do for that row. Now, the third row is the hardest row. It's always going to be the hardest row because you have to make sure you're going through the right holes and you're going through the right beads. And there's just a lot of beads on here that are loose and as nothing is defined. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take, I've already lined the beads up for the third row. I'm going to take my first bead and I'm going to put it right next to this one. And I'm going to go through the second bead, if you can see that, through the second bead. When I pull this through, they're going to line up side by side. Or in theory, they're going to line up side by side. Sometimes it takes a little bit of manipulation. Okay, there it goes. The next row, what we're going to do, the next bead, is we're going to take the next bead and we're going to skip one bead and we're going to go through that next one. And what's going to happen is these beads are going to sit side by side. And just pull your thread through. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, I'm sorry. When you start your project, you want to do about a wingspan from fingertip to fingertip of thread or less. Now, you probably, with most projects, will have to add some thread, so don't worry if you don't get enough on there for the first time. And if you see how the beads are lining up, all right, you keep doing that all through the third row, and your beads will twist around, so you got to be very mindful of where the beads sit. All right, and I'm going to skip a bead, and I'm going to go through this one. And once again, this row is the hardest one to do always. Any beader is going to tell you who does peyote stitch that the third row is always the hardest one to do. Only because you have to be mindful of where your beads are going, if they flip or not. If they'll be flipping around. Okay, and I'm just going to go quickly through the rest of this row. Sorry, my beads kind of get stuck on my sweaty fingers. I'm just going to quickly go through here and show you what it looks like at the end. So if you're a brand new beader, congratulations and welcome to the fabulous world of beading. And again, as I'm doing this, I'm sure I'm going a little faster, and my hands are in the way and you can't see it. But just know that every bead, I'm skipping every bead, the first bead rather, and I'm going through the second bead after the one that my thread is exiting. All right, and you see how it's all twisted up? I'll sort that out when I'm finished. And that's one of the difficult things, is sorting that out. Okay. And these beads, when I'm finished, are going to sit nice and side by side. And we're going to have two beads, one on top of each other, and between that, we're going to have a single bead in between those. And if you notice on the pattern, where it shows you where that's happening. And I know the patterns sometimes are a little confusing, sometimes they're a little overwhelming because there's a lot of information just on that little picture. But once you learn how to read the patterns, your whole world is going to open up to peyote stitch. It's actually one of my favorite patterns, or my favorite techniques rather, only because there's so much you can do for, and I'm Native American, so peyote stitch comes from the natives, so it just helps me connect with my heritage as I'm doing this. Okay, oops, I picked one extra bead up. All right, so I'm at the end of row 3. So what's happening is, if you look at this, it looks a hot mess because I did it very quickly. Once I start manipulating the beads, pull my thread a little tight, it looks correct. And you're going to want it to look in the diagonal. Let me get that last bead into line right there. And you want it to be in the diagonal here. There's two different ways to do the fourth row. If you see this one, you want to hold on to the, if you're going to do the fourth row without any assistance, without any other tips or tricks, excuse me, I can't speak today, you can just continue on and go through the row. One thing that Donald Oliver taught me just last night is on the top row, once you've got the third row done, and thank you, Donald, for that fabulous tip, is to take a beading needle, an extra beading needle, and run through the top beads. What's going to happen is you're going to hold your piece straight so you can get your fourth row on. See how it's now straight and all pretty? Okay, so that's a fabulous tip to use. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through row 4. Basically, it's just the same thing on the pattern, where I'm going to start this time from this side of the pattern though, where last time I started here, now I'm going to start here. And my wonderful assistant Olivia has already lined up the row for us. We see we're going to start here, we're going to go 2, and then we're going to keep going onto this. Again, some people would take the time to lay the beads out. I personally don't like to do that because I think it takes too much time away from beading, but I've been doing this for many years, so probably about 35 years. So I don't need to lay the beads out. If you're a beginner and you want to, please feel free to do that. One of the things that always helps me when beading is when I hold my thread, when I'm going from bead to bead, I put my thread behind my finger here, because what that does is it traps the thread so it can't twist around the piece. And then you have thread going everywhere and your piece is all tangled up. But I'm going to quickly go through the fourth row here. And then you'll see what it looks like. Now this time you can take your, after this you'll be able to take your bead stopper out and keep on moving, because the beads are no longer going to fall off the thread. At the beginning, if you don't have a bead stopper and you're working and you're not paying attention, half of your beads could fly off the other end of your thread, and then you have beads everywhere. And if you walk around in your bare feet like I do, and you don't have carpeting, you got beads sticking to your feet, or you're losing your precious beads that you just spent all your money on. So almost done with the fourth row. And the next thing we're going to do after this, just to let you know while you're watching me pick up these beads, next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to add a thread when you're in the middle of your project and you need to add some thread. I like to go about, wrong color bead, you also make sure you always put the right color bead on your needle. I like to go about till I have minimum of 6 inches left on my thread before I start to add another bead. And I don't want to go lower than 6 inches. I'm sorry, on my thread, excuse me. I have 6 inches of thread left. I don't want to go lower than 6 inches of thread because it's too difficult at that point to hide the other ends and to make it look neat. You don't want to fight with your thread as you're hiding it, and that just comes, sometimes it just distorts your project and distorts the way things are looking. It makes it look ugly, beads are out of place. And you'll also be able, might have knots, or, oh, I have a knot in my thread. Yeah, I'm actually working through my knot, and I knew I had one. I didn't want to stop to take that knot out, but now that I've finished this, I'll show you. Sometimes when you work with the fire line, or any thread, you'll have, sometimes it just knots up a little if you work with too long of a piece. I like to work with a long piece because I'm too lazy and I don't really like to add thread. So here you go, there's the fourth row. I take my needle out, and if you see, it's nice and straight now. I take my bead stopper off, and I can continue to go. Okay, so there we go. You see that? There's very quickly our first 4 rows. All right, so I'm going to set that aside and through the magic of YouTube videos, we have a piece that needs another thread added. Not really, but I want to show you how to do that. Okay, so there's two ways to do it. One is basically just to weave this end in, cut it off, and then weave another needle in to come out the same place. Well, I've learned a wonderful technique from a wonderful lady named Diane Fitzgerald. If you don't know who she is, look up her book. She's fabulous. She's a fabulous beader. What she taught me to do was to take my thread and add my new thread, just go through start about maybe this far back. That's where I like to start. Leave a little tail, so when you're going through, you have a place to snug it up, because if you put the thread all the way through the tail, it's going to come out, which if you've ever peyote stitched before, if you've ever beaded before, you know how much of a pain in the rear that is, because you have to keep starting and stopping and starting and stopping. One of the things that I like to do while I'm doing this, I do a U-turn, and I'll make 2 U-turns to do a circle, so it kind of knots the thread inside where it secures it a little bit, and then I'll tug, and if you can see, there's a little bit of thread showing here. When I tug it, it's going to kind of disappear. If you can see that right there, there's a little bit of thread showing here. Once I tug it tight, once I've secured everything, that will disappear. So you watch that, and there's my little tail. I'm pulling it in, and wiggle that once, the thread is gone. So now I'm just going to work up to where the other thread is, and I'm just going 1 to 2 beads at a time. You don't want to do too many. One thing happens if you do too many is your needle will bend, or it could break, depending on the type of beading needle that you have. The other one is that you could break your bead, and definitely do not want to break a bead, because then you have to take everything out and fix it. Okay, so I'm back at the point where I was before with the old needle. I have the new needle here, and the old needle. If you can see, they're both coming out of the same hole. So what you want to do is do like a shoelace knot, just the first half a square knot. Pull it tight. Most people don't like to knot in beading, but this is necessary just to give it a little bit of security when you're weaving your threads back in. And then you just take the old needle, just weave the thread back in the same way we wove it up, and then you start beading again. At the end, you're just going to, the reason I want about 6 inches on here, 3 to 4 inches, is you thread your needle back on here, and you weave this in the last 2 rows just to give them a little bit of stability. That looks like pretty much all we have at this moment for this class. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them down, and we'll discuss it in our class. Once again, if you haven't signed up for class yet, if you're on our Facebook group, send me a private message with your email address, or you can email me and I will send you an invite to the class. If I can think of anything else that we need, I will definitely let you know. I'll either post it on Facebook, or I will talk to you on Thursday the 26th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time for our class. Have a wonderful day. It's been fun.